video moves quickly. Expect to pause often to read through the sample passages. So what are assertions of significance? The subject of literature is human experience, so assertions that are significant will say something about the human experience. They will be assertions that tap into the universality of human experience. Using the poem Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson, we will go through an exercise in literary analysis. Keep in mind that the purpose of this exercise is not to analyze this poem in particular, but rather to give you a pattern to help you in literary analysis and making assertions of significance on your own. First, read through the poem. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling in the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Step 1. What does the text say? You must translate here. For the sake of this exercise, we'll only translate the beginning of the text. Because I could not stop for death, translation, I was living, not dying or thinking about dying. He, death, kindly stopped for me. Translation, I died. Step 2. How does the text say what it says? Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. This is personification, giving human qualities to an inanimate thing. For a deeper analysis, you might consider the difference between personification and anthropomorphism, which is that anthropomorphizing involves ascribing human attributes or personality to anything impersonal. This is a nuance that you might see and find relevant. If not, though, continue the personification analysis. Step 3. Unpack the how. In other words, articulate how personification, or anthropomorphism, best conveys the author's ideas about death. Why not use a simile instead, or hyperbole, or an illusion, or a combination? Personification, or anthropomorphism, allows a writer to increase or decrease the severity or intensity of a concept by making it human. In this case, the poet reduces the otherworldliness of death to the familiarity of a carriage driver. Next, logically, comes the question of why the writer felt the need to portray death in this way. This leads to meaning and significance. The answer taps into shared human experience. Which brings us to step 4. Why is the what and how important? How do these convey some meaning, significance about the human experience? In this step, you must draw text-based conclusions and make inferences that stay within the bounds of the text. You might actually make inferences first and then make conclusions, but it must all be based on textual evidence. It's simply not true that each of us sees a completely different meaning in each piece of writing, and that all of these are equally correct or valid. If the text does not support your conclusions or inferences, then they are faulty or unfounded. In this case, you should go back to the text and retrace your analysis, particularly focusing on step 1, determining what the text actually says. Back to the poem. Referring to the lines above, why is it important that the speaker, or the persona of the poem, sees death as a non-threatening carriage driver? The answer to this question encompasses both the what and the how. This leads to another what-how analysis. How does death being a carriage driver, what, convey something about the human experience? To answer this, you must consider the part-to-whole dynamic. Each part, piece, excerpt, or line from a work must be considered within the context of the whole. By the end of the poem, the speaker, persona of the poem, reveals that death, a carriage driver, has been driving for centuries, but the experience feels shorter than the day she first embarked. In the context of the whole poem, death kindly stopping for the speaker has initiated a surprisingly pleasant experience. This is significant because humans traditionally fear death, or at least wonder about it. They have an inborn survival instinct to avoid death, and many of us have strong beliefs about the death of the body versus the final extinction of the person, or the spirit, or the soul, the essence. Many religious belief systems teach that death is a doorway to the afterlife, which can be rewarding or punishing. In short, the human experience requires people to die, to think about death, to determine beliefs about death, to confront the death of loved ones, and to read and write about death before we die, since we cannot do so afterwards. Now, using these ideas, let's review a thesis generator example over Because I Could Not Stop for Death. If you've never used one, a thesis generator is just what it sounds like, a tool to help you generate a thesis. We will turn what we've learned into a thesis statement that makes an assertion of significance. This thesis generator process involves identifying the subject of your paper, an abstract concept, turning your subject into a guiding question, answering your question with a statement, refining the statement into a working thesis, and then creating a second version of your thesis. So, we'll identify the subject of your paper, death. Then we'll turn the subject into a guiding question. What opinion or observation does the poem express about death as a part of the human experience? We'll answer the question with a statement. Death doesn't have to be feared. We'll refine the statement into a working thesis. In Because I Could Not Stop for Death, Emily Dickinson provides a non-threatening glimpse at death. Then we'll create a second revision. In Because I Could Not Stop for Death, Emily Dickinson challenges the widely held image of death as the Grim Reaper by personifying him as a benign carriage driver. Using the thesis we just generated, we can move vertically through the poem, addressing each instance of support for our thesis to generate topic sentences. For your vertical movement, begin with your how, personification in this instance, and go deeper using the text. Your thesis is, in Because I Could Not Stop for Death, Emily Dickinson challenges the widely held image of death as the Grim Reaper by personifying him as a benign carriage driver. So topic sentence 1 should address the first instance of personification in the poem and how it develops the speaker's image of death as benign rather than fearful. So in line 2, death is kindly. Topic sentence 2 should address the second instance of personification in the poem. In line 5, he knew no haste. Topic sentence 3 should address the third instance of personification. And we have in line 8, his civility, so death is civil. Topic sentence 4 should address the fourth instance of personification in the poem and how it develops the speaker's image of death as benign rather than fearful. And in line 17, we have we paused, and using we here indicates death as a companion on the journey. After you write each paragraph, before you go on to the next, touch back to the thesis to be sure that you stayed focused on proving the thesis. If not, revise before you proceed. Be sure to transition from each paragraph's point or topic to the next paragraph fluently so that your connections are explicit and specific. Now we'll revise our thesis a bit and try a horizontal movement to generate topic sentences. Instead of moving in order through the text, we'll consider elements across the poem to make and prove our assertion. For your horizontal movement, select 3 to 5 literary elements and synthesize them to support your idea in a thesis statement. In this case, you might select personification, details, and metaphor, and explain how they work together to create meaning or significance. If this were an equation, it would look something like this. Personification plus details plus metaphor equals meaning and significance. And in this case, personification and details and metaphor equal death as a surprisingly harmless, even pleasant experience instead of a scary, cruel one. So the new thesis is, through personification, details, and metaphor in Because I Could Not Stop for Death, Emily Dickinson portrays death benignly, challenging the widely held image of death as a fearful force. Notice that the new thesis makes essentially the same assertion as the original thesis. The original thesis asserts that Emily Dickinson challenges the widely held image of death as the Grim Reaper by personifying him as a benign carriage driver, and the new thesis says that Emily Dickinson portrays death benignly, challenging the widely held image of death as a fearful force. The difference is that rather than just focusing on personification, you look at the combination of three literary elements. Now back to our new thesis, which is again, through personification, details, and metaphor in Because I Could Not Stop for Death, Emily Dickinson portrays death benignly, challenging the widely held image of death as a fearful force. Topic sentence 1 should address the element of personification and explain how this personification portrays death as kindly and not fearful. Topic sentence 2 should address the element of details and explain how the selection of details in the poem portray death as benign. And topic sentence 3 should address the metaphors in the poem and how they portray death as benign. As before, after you write each paragraph, touch back to the thesis to be sure that you stayed focused on proving the thesis. If not, revise before you proceed. Be sure to transition from each paragraph's point or topic to the next paragraph fluently so that the connection among the elements is explicit and specific.